Yes, lovely, beautiful people, non-beautiful people are also welcome, as well as evidenced by Mr. Jack Archer being on the podcast. Not the other Jack. The other Jack we've got is incredibly handsome. So guest episode this week. I'm not allowed to tell you the episode number. The executive producer has banned me from doing that because we kept getting it wrong because the upload order was fucked. So this will be in your ears at some point, which is
At
obviously
some point, within the
because
next 4 to 6 weeks, at some point, we'll get through the backlog. Yeah, I
we are
remember this
about
one.
as backed up as somebody that's been eating no fiber for the last 7 years.
Every carnivore influencer on the internet. Get it in early. Get it in early.
Good stuff, man. So, Jack, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Give us the rundown of
Oh God.
what you do, why you do it.
So I'm Jack. I'm an online coach. I've been a PT for just over a decade now. So
Little while.
it's not my first rodeo. I feel like an old man I'm getting towards old man in the industry. So yeah, I've been doing this for a decade now. I'm also a accredited nutritionist, and this year I stopped PTing in person and went fully online with my business. So JC Performance Coaching is the business that I run. We help people run further, faster, lift heavier, and feel like they've got at least a half decent rig to feel confident in their budgie smugglers in as well.
Awful underwear choice.
Yeah. Awful underwear choice, but I respect it. You know, if you've got the confidence to wear a pair of bright green budgie smugglers on the beach, then that just it demands nothing but respect from everyone else. But I guess to give a bit of context of my journey, I was a very overweight kid. I think my heaviest I was probably topping the scales at 20 plus stone, and I kind of wish I could say I was carrying that well, but I think I had a 44-inch waist and a BMI of about 37. So I was definitely the big kid in my group, and this is winding back 17 years or so. So again, I've been at it for a while and done all sorts of things, from ridiculous endurance challenges. I'm sure we'll get onto that at some point. High rocks, powerlifting, bodybuilding, photo shoots. Like, it's pretty much been 17 years of trying to tick every box possible. So yeah, I've been around the roundabout a couple of times.
Fair play. Where are you at the moment then with like what you're doing training wise?
So I'm just at the start of an ultra prep. So I'm doing 2 ultra marathons next year. I've got 55k in July and 110k, which is over 2 days in September. And I mean, this is kind of all down to probably not getting sort of like lost or anything with sort of bodybuilding training. I think it ran its course for me. You know, I really enjoyed it. I did two shoots, one with Chris Bailey, which was amazing. And I guess like a long-standing passion of mine is performance-based training and, you know, competing in events and things like that. So I did a High Rocks earlier this year, and I mean, my kind of sporting background is rugby, and then I was a ski instructor before I came to Newcastle, which is where I live now. I did that for 6 months before I came to uni here. So the kind of performance element side of it has always been something that's really interested me. And I think I kind of realized over the years that I was a very below average powerlifter, and maybe had a half decent bench, but everything else was pretty piss poor. I think that's largely due to my leverages, but endurance is always something that like I found very satisfying. Like, it's always something that's kind of resonated with me, the sort of challenge of it. And I really like being out in the sort of hills and mountains and stuff like that. So the kind of the opportunity to combine them all. Plus, I've got an older brother who's really into it as well, and sort of pulled my leg. And then we were discussing what sort of races I might do for my first one, and he just told me to sign up for it. So we paid for both of us to do it and signed the dotted line. So yeah, I've thrown myself in at the deep end.
So you've paid to do something absolutely hellish.
Yeah, I've paid for the privilege to put myself through probably 8 hours at least of torture.
I mean, that's
What do
quite
you
the
feel
difference
you
to
get
each
out
one.
of it? Oh, sorry, Jack.
And I was just going to say, that's in a span of like 2 minutes. That's quite the difference of what you're doing now compared to what I think you said it was 17 years ago when you were like overweight as a child.
Yeah.
What led to that change? Because obviously that's a huge 180 that you've done there.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think probably like most people who have that sort of change in their life, it was like I remember the exact moment, and I've told this story a couple of times, but it was when I'd been at my dad's at Christmas that year, and there was probably a string of things that happened, like I'd broken up with a girlfriend of a couple of years.
Revenge arc. Let's go.
Revenge style. So that had happened, and I had to, my rugby playing sort of took a sideline. So I had a really good year of playing rugby.
Fucking hell, I wouldn't want to run into you.
Probably not 120 kilos.
Although
I say that, I was way more lethal at 90. So I'd had a string of injuries there. So I'd had a neck injury, I'd had a shoulder injury, and then my appendix burst. So I had to take the full year out of playing rugby. And as you can imagine, if you still eat like you're a prop forward or a second row, for anyone that knows what they're talking about with rugby, one of the 5 biggest players on the team, if you still carry on eating like that but you're doing no training, it just starts to pile on. So that's sort of what happened to me. Is I went from this place of feeling like I was on top of the world and really fit and doing really well with my rugby, and a year down the line I was probably 3 stone heavier. Feeling really unhappy, and that sort of gradually sort of kept trickling up that way. Well, I had this moment after I think I'd finished 3 or 4 courses at my dad's house for Christmas dinner, and I remember looking at myself in the mirror and seeing how much my belly was overhanging my trousers, like a significant amount. And I think it's one of those things now where, like, I don't walk around like I'm chiseled out of fucking marble, but I've got enough experience and I've been lifting long enough to at least look semi like I lift. But to go from sort of like that point there was this real sort of like vision, even as a sort of teenager, of like that, like if I don't do anything now, like in 40 years time, I'm going to be a statistic, like something bad is going to happen to me. And it was that real, like, it's like someone put the fear of God in me that something terrible was going to happen soon if I didn't change anything. And it was very, very simple. And this is like the funny thing that like so many people massively overcomplicate it. I was eating a massive fuck off bowl of cereal whenever I got in from college. So I just swapped it for a chicken salad and started running and training. And that was literally it. That's all I did for 2 years. And I think I lost 4 or 5 stone in that time. And one thing led to another. I started getting more and more into training. I started training with a friend of my mum's, used to be a personal trainer. So I started training with him a couple of times a week and kind of got into bodybuilding, went and did a ski season, went to uni, and it was sort of the tail end of my first year of uni when I wasn't really enjoying it that much in terms of like the course itself. And a friend of mine had just qualified as a PT, so I was looking into it, and a chance meeting with the guy who became my first ever sort of mentor in the industry. We both used to work for Cotswold Outdoors. He was part-time PT, part-time retail when he's building his business up, and he just said, "Oh, by the way, I'm a mentor on this course. You can get qualified through it and just pay it back whenever you can." So I just decided between my 2nd and 3rd year to qualify as a PT. And then as I was finishing my dissertation on the Holocaust, because I studied history at uni, I also decided to start a fitness business because, that's a really sensible thing to do both of those things at the same time.
Absolutely.
And then here we are 10 years later. Turns out a dissertation in the Holocaust leads to a career that lasts at least 10 years. But yeah, it was a fairly... I guess a fairly sort of typical journey with how I got started for a lot of people, but led me down to kind of going into the path of the career that I've got now.
And if you learn anything from that dissertation, it's clearly that starvation mode isn't real.
That is correct. I'm not going to borrow a joke from Paul Standel on that one because I can't get away with making jokes like that. But yeah, it is very much true. I mean, I'd probably use the Minnesota starvation experiment instead. I think that's probably a bit more PC.
It's not as fun though.
I know that we did kind of briefly touch on before the call, and I'm keen to get into it. You said a few kind of like fitness myths or nutrition myths, I think it was, that you think still kind of pervade the industry. What are some of the... Obviously, we touched on one, starvation mode. For those who are listening, hopefully by now should know it's bullshit. But
no one dies of starvation. What are you
Yeah,
talking
it's
about?
true. You just stay like you instead of getting peeled, you just stay like somewhat lean. You just hold on to body fat. You just
Or you just gain more. I think that's what
yeah,
really
you
happens.
start getting fatter.
It's got
Yeah.
nothing to do with not sticking to your diet.
You walk up to someone and you're like, "Wow, you're heavily overweight. How'd you get there?" And they're like, "I haven't eaten in 8 years. Just keep on starving."
Yeah.
Are there any kind of nutrition myths that you're keen to kind of dispel? Any that really grind your gears? I'm
I
keen to
mean,
get this going.
fucking like if we got through all of them, we'd be here all day.
Go on, top three maybe, depending on how long you want to give to it.
Okay.
Two.
I mean, the top one at the moment has to be just because it's so like prevalent at the moment. And I think, this is the sort of thing where like there is this sort of theme in stuff that I see in terms of misinformation being spread, that it tends to be very sort of fringe information. Like you can see the people who are believing in it they've probably gone down a bit of a rabbit hole. Like, quite a lot of them are very, maybe anti-vax as well. Like, big pharma, big food, big pharma, the government's trying to poison you. There's
Thank you
too
for
much
saying
fluoride in the water.
Yeah,
all
you
of this
believe
sort of
you
stuff.
believe one of them, you also get all the other ones.
Yeah, which by the way, like if anyone's interested in reading about that, there's a book called The Irrational Ape by David Robert Grimes, where he basically talks about that chain of like, so you can see it with like with mums who start off with like looking at like not feeding their baby anything but organic food. How you get from that to a position of not giving your baby vaccines, you can almost trace the people following the groups that just go one level deeper. And I think it's the same with nutrition myths as well. And I think, for me, the biggest one at the moment is this idea of like, people don't need to eat vegetables. Like the healthiest food on the planet is eggs and red meat, and your LDL cholesterol doesn't matter. And it's just one of those things that is so dangerous for some people to follow that level of advice. And the thing that really scares me about it, and I think in terms of dispelling the myth, like that's something that's long standing in terms of cholesterol research. Like we know that dietary cholesterol intake maybe doesn't have the effect that we once thought it did, but high levels of saturated fat intake and seeing your LDL cholesterol go up, like it's not a good thing to see. And I think it's this sort of narrative alongside that, like I feel so good doing this diet. Well, you can't feel plaque buildup, you can't feel heart disease. It just happens to you in 15 years time.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
Know what I mean?
My God.
Yeah, mate, 100%. There's been
If you haven't made that as a post, that has to be made.
I mean, I will credit the people that I think it was it Gary from Triage Method? I think it was Gary McGowan who said it the other day. So
It
I
sounds
have
like
to,
something you'd
I have
say.
to credit him for that. I can't steal that off him and claim it as my own, but it's a really good point. Like you can't feel these, these health impairments happening bit by bit. And you see these fucking influencers like, I won't say who it is, but particular ginger carnivore influencer posting his bloods and people picking up like he's got really high HbA1c, his LDL's through the roof, and he's like, I'm not worried about these things. You've got doctors in the comments being like, please change something about your diet. This is really bad. Like you're pre-diabetic because your diet is so fucked. And it's this thing of like, there was so brazenly like, but I feel at my best. Like I'm really like clear with my head. But at the same time, like you've got no idea what this is doing to the insides of you for the next 10, 15 years. So I think it'll be one of these scary things where all of a sudden people who've been following carnivore for a really long time start finding out that they've been having, arterial plaque buildup over 10 years. And now they're fucked because they weren't eating enough vegetables.
It's like the move from, I've seen a lot more people move away from like olive oil or seed oils get hugely demonized, and now it's like people are being like, go back to butter, or even better, raw milk, raw butter, like raw dairy products, or people saying like animal fats are healthier than plant fats. Like but a lot of the people saying that make nutrition into like a conspiracy rather than like an objective science, and it's so baffling. Like there aren't the government isn't hiding like nutritional science from you to what end? Like what, so the NHS has more burden? I'm so confused. I don't get it. Like it's just so weird. People want to be like so counterculture that they'll go like into conspiracy theories of like nutrition. It's so weird.
Yeah,
It
it's
must be such a sad way to live, to believe that you've got like no responsibility over anything, and
and I
like
think
everyone is out to get you.
it's that thing as well, isn't it? Where like a lot of these people, their entire identity is tied to how they eat.
Yeah,
And
it's true.
you know, for me, and this is a serious point, if that's not screaming someone's got a really sort of disordered way of their, seeing their food relationship, then, I don't know what sort of other big red flag is going to show itself in that situation. Like if your entire life is based around the fact that you eat meat and eggs, like life is so much better than that. I mean, they're good, but they're not that fucking good.
Yeah. It's always it feels like it's always guys, blokes, men, like who, and it's always like embracing like just like animal produce as much as possible, red meat, eggs, raw fish, raw honey. Here's what I eat in a day to avoid processed foods. Okay, cool. And then they'll be like, don't eat protein powder, it's awful for you, it's processed. And then go and consume like 100 grams of saturated fat every single day.
Yeah.
Oh, tell him about the client you had a while ago, Jack, that was banging on about only wanting to eat like natural foods, and then they fucking went. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So I had a client who they were, I don't want to give it too much away. They they weren't a fan.
You've said this on the podcast before. I remember.
To be fair, they weren't a fan of processed foods, and I kind of sat them down and was like, okay, well, that's a bit of an umbrella term, and it depends what you're talking about. Are we talking about a McDonald's or a protein shake? Like, that's just because they're processed doesn't mean they're equivalent, but sure. And they were like, I got through to them and they said, I understand that. I'm still not comfortable eating those. And I was like, if you don't want to eat them, that's fine. And then they checked in one time and were like, yeah, sorry, I had a crazy night. I was drinking cocktails all night, and I forget what else it was. It was cocktails and
what, ketamine or something?
Good one.
I can't remember what it was. I think it was something processed but perceived as healthy. I think it was like a soy product or something, or mycoprotein or something. I forget what it was, but it baffled me because they were so like into like healthy, natural, whole food eating to the point where they were like uncomfortable consuming like some plant-based products because they perceive them as processed, because there's some processing there, like corn products, or even like I think they were hell-bent on like making their own soy-based products from soya beans, but they were completely comfortable with going out and consuming alcohol, a quite literal poison. Like, I don't know, it's just people seem to draw these strange start and end points to their own thinking.
The mental gymnastics that people do to like justify what they already believe is insane.
Yeah.
Like you can't argue with a conspiracy theorist because they can spin it the other way. You're like, oh, we have this evidence that shows that thing's not true. Yeah, well, they manufactured that evidence to make you believe it.
Yeah. Who
Big
paid
food,
for the
isn't it?
study? But
I think it's really similar to the whole like anyone who's still really into the whole insulin hypothesis, they'll always move the goalposts.
Oh, God, yeah.
And there's just that sort of like that cognitive dissonance of like there's always one more thing, and it just goes in whatever direction it needs to for them to not be wrong about what they're saying, even if they end up just totally contradicting themselves.
Yeah, that insulin one's still painful. I'm assuming, are you talking about people just assume that any kind of insulin spike is bad and it instantly gets stored as fat?
Yeah, and ignoring the fact that when you drink whey protein, it's a very similar insulin spike after that, and they'll be fine slamming a shake after a workout, but don't eat a banana for breakfast.
Yeah, the whole demonizing insulin and insulin spikes is still something that I think I see it in like a lot of PTs as well. It seems to be more that I see like the animal fats being better than plant fats seems to be conspiratorial. The insulin bad seems to be like just shared by people who are like genuinely in the pursuit of nutritional knowledge. And it's
I think
to see.
I think certainly for quite a lot of I was the same as well when I first started out. When you're new to the industry, when you're sort of going through that process of finding your feet and figuring out who you are, there's a lot of inherited bias that we kind of have in the fitness industry. It's everything has to be 3 sets. If you don't track your food, you're not doing nutrition properly. Like insulin bad, cortisol bad. Like why? What's the reason for it? Like what's your proof that that's the case? And I think, it's one of the best questions that people can ask is like, why? Like, why is that there?
It's so funny because you ask them why a couple of times, but you have to phrase it so you're not just saying why. Like it's how does that work? Could you tell me a little bit more? And you just see their brains spinning round, and they're like, "Oh fuck, I don't know."
Yeah. And
It's so funny.
instead of saying I don't know, because that's the big thing to do, and everyone would respect you for saying, do you know what? Like, actually, I don't think I know what I'm talking about here. I really appreciate you saying that. Like, can you either help me or point me in the direction of where I can go and learn more? People just keep digging and keep digging and keep digging. And then you end up with this situation on social media where it's just a fucking shouting match. And it's, this is, I think, where a lot of it comes from is people get engagement from having shouting matches. And it's something periodically, I have to remind myself about. It's as tempting as it is to get involved with this. If you wrestle with a pig, like, you're both going to get dirty, and pigs like being covered in shit. So you're always going to lose.
I think the thing is, like, people who are that like embedded in those ideas, they're not going to change. They're not going to be like, oh, thanks for that, Jack. That's a really good point. You've actually changed my perspective. I'm going to change the entire purpose of my social media profile.
Yeah.
Like, they'll either ignore you because your point's too good, or they'll just like keep on throwing, sort of vaguely connected science, weird hypotheses, outdated information,
Science that they've not actually read.
What's that? Oh yeah, studies they've not read. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Animal studies they've not read.
It's like when Eddie Abu says, like, look it up, or what was it he was talking about, Luke? Was it was like, calories don't matter, hormones matter, calories are a myth.
Yeah.
And then he said, look it up.
Thermodynamics only applies in physics, but we're humans and hormones control us.
Yeah, and then he'd say shit like, look it up. My favorite one is when he gets bread and he's like, there should only be like 5 ingredients in bread. Why is there 11? That's bad. And it's like, no, just like, can you at least talk about what the extra ingredients that you perceive are, and then maybe make a case for why they're bad? Because like, you could make a good case for, in some circumstances, that's not a great idea for some people, but you can't just be like, oh, this is added, it's bad. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's that thing, like cereal gets a bad rap as well.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, when they're consuming fortified cereals, that's where they're getting some of their B vitamins, some of their iron, some of their calcium, like some of their vitamin D. Like, this comes from fortified breakfast products.
But you know why they put that in there? You know why they put those
to keep you sick?
Yeah.
They're trying to keep it down.
That's it. They're trying to keep us all sick so that they have to pay more money later on when we get ill.
Absolutely, mate.
It's just so weird that like people deem like diet as like one food. Do you know what I mean? Rather than like kind of things that slot together. It's like a slice of pizza isn't inherently healthy or unhealthy. What is the context? Do you know what I mean? Like, who's having it? How often? How much? Is the slice of pizza that big or this big? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's, people often miss the point because they're so sort of narrow focus when it comes to diet. And I mean, so I'm a massive history nerd. Like, I studied history at uni, and just out of pure interest, I thought I'd see where the root of the word diet actually comes from. And I can't remember if it's ancient Greek or Latin. I think it's ancient Greek, and the word is dieta, which means a way of life. And I think that's such a better way of looking at it. But like, you can't fucking sell that, can you? And it's that's really what we're all after, is eating in a way that supports the life that we want. But that's a really unsexy thing to say when you're like, oh, actually you should be eating raw testicles and drinking raw milk because big food's keeping you down. Like, one of those sells to people and one of those doesn't.
Yeah it just seems to be like people are more obsessed with like their perception or having this pride. I think the whole like, artificial sweeteners and processed foods. It's just people trying to be like, I'm better than you. Like I don't even drink coffee in the morning because I don't want to fuck with my cortisol levels. I leave it 90 minutes. I'm fasting for half the day, and then I'm only eating fats and protein. It's so weird, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's like, okay, cool, you do you, man. Like,
Yeah,
I'm probably 3 coffees deep by 10 a.m. I need it to function.
yeah. Exactly.
Do you think carnivores now are worse than vegans like 5 years ago?
Ooh.
In terms of like the moral righteousness of just, I'm so fucking awesome.
They feel louder.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's because it's just attracted loads of alpha males, basically.
Yeah.
And they were always the loudest people in the room anyway. And I think it's probably just tapped into this whole sort of like post-COVID, like people were a bit frustrated at governments and like systems that like weren't serving them, but really there was, you know, maybe a step that got skipped, which was like, can we actually take responsibility of some of this ourselves and, you know, actually do due diligence to figure out what's really good for us. No, we're going to listen to some shirtless dude who's on a load of gear eat raw liver because actually he's given us an out. He's given us a scapegoat that, like, you know, this Western way of eating and this normal way of eating that everyone follows is keeping you sick. And actually, I think it's this probably a bit of a frustration, a bit of a need for some sort of leadership or role model. And again, it's because it's aspirational, a lot of it. You know, a lot of these people, they're ripped, like they seem like they're in really good shape. They've usually got mansions, whether they're rented or not. Like they spend their entire life making social media videos. Like people want that. And especially I think young men who are a bit lost, who I think, I don't know for sure, but I would hedge my bet that's probably the vast majority of the audience of these people. But that also makes up a big majority of people on social media as well. So I think that's why they tend to be so loud. And perhaps that was the difference between carnivore and vegan was, I don't think it was the same sort of crowd. You know, I think it's, you know, the people who were being really sort of loud and brash with veganism, it tended to be sort of more like social justice and like activism. Whereas this, I think, is a bit more, it's almost like left wing versus right wing. I never thought I'd get like down this rabbit hole on a conversation, but I'm enjoying it, by the way.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Do you know what I mean, though? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I think a lot of people who are vegan, even at the extremes, probably follow more left wing ways of thinking. And a lot of the people who follow the sort of carnivore, like, you know, ideas are probably a lot more right wing.
Yeah.
Which it does, and it ends up with that thing of, you know, when it comes to politics, extreme left and extreme right are about that close together. And a lot of it is really similar, even if the sort of like the direction that they believe in is different, but all the ways that they go about doing it are very similar. So probably all the traits of it are really similar. I think it's just the vehicle looks slightly different. So I think they're just as bad as each other, basically, Luke.
Yeah, I'd probably add that just from like this people I've spoke to at the gym and that sort of thing, there's also a pretty big cohort of like late 30s, 40-year-old guys that are like, oh, I need to sort my shit out at this stage type of things as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I completely get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Do you think the moment it almost started to crumble was the whole Liver Kings on gear?
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure.
Like that's when the parcel really started coming down.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's the longer, I mean, it's going to fail. It's definitely going to fail because it's a fucking fad diet. And you know, you can see even the person who popularized it, Paul Saladino, he doesn't even follow a carnivore diet anymore. Like and you can see he was like, he posted his blood results and he's been banging on for years about how he's not worried about them. And then all of a sudden he was like, I can't do carnivore anymore because my bloods are terrible. And it's like, you know, maybe there's something in that. Like, you know, I've got nothing against these people personally. I think morally what they do is very wrong in terms of how they, you know, they use very convincing language and very sort of slick tactics and carefully placed wording and, you know, using sort of phrases that are just outside of people's kind of comprehension.
Yeah.
Like talking about anti-nutrients and things like that. Like these things are, people don't understand what they are. So you can get away with sort of like brushing over it, and it's like, oh fuck, that sounds scary. But then when you listen to someone like, you know, Gary McGowan break it down, or you know, the doctor chap, Dr. Ids, you listen to one of these guys who understands what those things are on a very sort of deep level because of their background in research, and you listen to them break it down and how little it matters, and all of a sudden these arguments start to fall apart. But it's because it is, I think it is that point of like, a lot of these guys have really aspirational lives, but you know, like the Liver King built his sort of wealth on property, I think, before he started this company. And then you see, you know, if anyone's watched the sort of More Plates, More Dates breakdown of it, you see the whole chain of things happening. Like it was all planned. So, you know, it's nothing that's not out there already that like, I think it is very much people saw what they could get out of it from the point of view of the influencer, and that's why a lot of them are doing it, because it does sell. You can make money off it. I think sadly, like people care more about that than they care about people's health.
Do you think that fad diets will ever kind of truly go? Like, do you think that we had, I don't know if it's a bit harsh calling veganism a bit of a fad diet, but it definitely did trend. And now we're kind of seeing a big pushback the other way. Do you think we're kind of on our way to balance, or do you think there's just always going to be something or someone misconstruing something for
Yeah, I think it is hard to say, isn't it? Because like, I'm sure much like you guys, you know, a lot of my friends are in the fitness industry, and a lot of people I know, you know, we will have had conversations over time. So naturally, you know, some of the stuff that I understand will have rubbed off on them. So I think my direct sort of circle of people, and even sort of beyond that, like my echo chamber is very sensible with these things. And I think a lot of people I'm around can spot bullshit. So I think less and less people are falling for it. But just talking to people in the general, like weddings are a really, really good time to realize how little people actually know. Because number one, as soon as you say you're a coach or a PT or a nutritionist, people are going to go, oh, well, for breakfast, I usually, it's like, fuck off, mate. I'm at a wedding. I'm literally stood here drinking a Guinness. Leave me alone. But it does show that, like, I think they'll be around forever, because there's always a way that people can get sold this dream. And I think it is just that, sadly, people are always going to be vulnerable, you know, when they've got something that they're struggling with. And there's always this thing about, like, even when people have got it, like they feel like they've got it absolutely nailed. I was speaking with my brother about this the other day, because he said, you know, a few of his friends were sort of buying into these really sort of like niche supplements, like they're really sort of like into like specific mushrooms and stuff like that for like recovery. And I was like, but I know them. They're out 3 nights a week smashing 10 pints. Like maybe not 10 pints 3 nights a week, but you know, they're not a stranger in the pub, and they're taking some weird exotic mushroom that no one's ever heard of to help with their recovery, but they won't go to bed earlier, they won't drink less alcohol, and you know, they won't sort their diet out and have better nutrient quality, or go and train 3 times a week, because they're the worried, well, like they don't have any problems, so people can make them up for them. It's like, oh, we've actually got the thing that you're missing, because no one's been talking about this before. And all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, well maybe I should get on board with that. Like people can sell to FOMO forever. And I think that's it. It's something that will probably always be there. And I think, you know, the fitness industry in general is doing a really good job of getting louder about helping people understand nonsense. But you've also got really big names still spreading absolute shite. So it's always going to be there at a point. But, you know, it makes for people who understand what they're talking about to be able to make good content about it. So maybe it's a useful thing. That you've got to have the sort of yin and yang, don't you?
Yeah, someone sent me one the other day called, you're going to like this, the Invincible Stack. Okay.
Oh dear.
So we're going to start with the very best supplement that's in there, creatine monohydrate.
Okay.
And I literally said this, I was like, the only one I would bother with is creatine. We've got testosterone plus gummies.
Testosterone plus what, sorry?
Test plus gummies. So they've got testosterone in and some other shite. We've got black seed oil, ginger, ashwagandha, which is okay, decent, but let's be honest, probably not at a decent dose. And just like fucking loads more shit like that.
Jesus Christ.
It's mental. It's absolutely. I mean, the supplement industry is particularly bad for it, and always has been, and I think always will be. But it very much is like, again, like people sort of giving other people problems because, you know, they're not in a position where they have to worry about like, okay, I can't actually fucking afford food today. You know, they don't live in some sort of like, you know, like food desert or anything like that. So I think it is that it's always going to be able to sort of play on the worried well card side of things.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And a lot of the times in the marketing, they make it sound so vague. It's like, oh, do you have low energy?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
How many
You
people
probably
do you know? How many people do you know recently who've been like, "Oh, do I have low testosterone? I feel like my testosterone might be low." Every single time someone asks me that question, I go, "If you're questioning it, you're fine, because you would know." Like, people seem obsessed with like these small little, like people get obsessed with the minutia more than they're like just committing to a process and just kind of doing it, you know.
I'm really sorry, guys. There's someone that keeps knocking at my door. I'm going to be 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries, bro. No worries. That's all good. What Jack was saying about the wedding thing is so true. Like you get those big sort of social family things, and you realize how little the average person knows. And like obviously, a smaller family thing, they all know what you do roughly, but it's a bit different at a wedding where it's going to be like different people that don't necessarily know. So I can imagine that that's fucking a headache when they then find out. But I'm like, I try and stay out of the conversation. I'm like, I don't want to know. Like, I genuinely don't want to know some shit that you believe.
When you're in that like environment with people who like their only exposure to you is like, you know, at a wedding or a party or whatever. So you're there for a few hours. You know that there's nothing that you can really say that's going to be like that useful, and it's going to take a lot of effort to kind of like really break down. I feel like that's one of the most frustrating environments to be in, because it's like if you talk to me any other time in the day except for when I'm like out in my free time, I will gladly talk you through, okay, here's some misconceptions and maybe why you're wrong. But if we're like out at a party or a wedding and, you know, people are like talking to you about XYZ, it's just so painful to run through absolutely everything, like you said, with like a Guinness in hand or whatever.
Yeah, literally. I mean, like I do remember, I think there's probably certain times like I've had sort of family friends come up to me, and the only time I could think of where I've been able to give someone a logical solution was when I was actually just really blunt about it. And he was someone he was like, oh, I've started skipping breakfast and I've been losing weight, and I wanted to lose weight because I was overweight, and you know, it was going really, really well. And then my friend at the gym said, oh, don't skip breakfast because it'll slow down. Guess where I'm going here? It'll slow down your metabolism.
Good.
And
very good.
And I was like, in my head, I was like, I could go off on a rant about this because that's what I want to do, but it's not going to be useful for him. And I sort of turned it back and said, look, like, what do you think? Like, what was working better for you? And he was like, well, not eating breakfast. I was like, would you do that then? Yeah. Like, it's not going to kill you. And was it helping you lose weight? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's going to be more beneficial for you. And, you know, just for a bit of reassurance, I can guarantee that nothing is wrong with your metabolism, because to go off on a tangent, this is probably a podcast in and of itself. Like, people don't understand what metabolism actually is. It's like, you realize if we could turn it on and off that easily, we'd be fucked. We'd all be absolutely fucked, because it's the thing that turns over cells in our bodies to keep us alive. It's all those functions, from fucking breathing to being able to process nutrients to shifting blood around your body. You really think a banana is going to impact that to a degree where, like, if it could, your metabolism was that fucked, you'd be in hospital and you'd have a serious problem. So I think it is that, like, this is what 10 years in the industry does to you, just get fucking grumpy.
That's hilarious,
But yeah, it was very much that thing of like, basically in the kindest way possible, your mate's talking out his arse and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But people really struggle to distinguish, because you say something with that much confidence and that much certainty.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's almost a red flag if someone's doing that. Like, and it's advice that I give to my clients all the time. Like, if you're looking at something online and it seems convincing and they're talking like with certainty about an absolute point, run a fucking mile, because like there is always two sides to the coin. Like, everything that is good for someone could be bad for someone else.
Yeah, mate, I think that's sorry, I was seeing if Luke, if you
I was going to say something, and then I thought you were going to say something, and then none of us said anything.
You just silently out-polited each other.
I just wanted to I'll just cap it off with, like, yeah, I think that the key takeaway is anyone who is knowledgeable within a subject is always going to caveat themselves, because, again, like you said, there's so many different people in so many different situations, and you can't have a universal good or bad. You can slightly lean towards it, but it's very hard to give those kind of absolutes, like you said. And particularly, yeah, if you run into someone who just randomly gives you off the cuff advice that's dead certain and starts throwing the word metabolism around like it's something that you can manipulate, then like heart rate, then they're chatting absolute bollocks. Anyway, Luke, I'll let you crack on with your
as you say, there's two sides to everything there. So you've got the guy who's skips breakfast and it's worked really well. There's going to be people like him that do that and are huge fucking advocates for you need to skip breakfast if you want to lose weight. There's also the other guy who probably tried skipping breakfast but found that he just ate like a cunt for the rest of the day because he was so hungry. And then you've got all the people in the middle that have sort of tried it and it's maybe worked a little bit, or they're not seeing that much difference and they can't decide which one of the sides to go to. Like, the reason that these things become popular is because a bunch of people have fucking tried carnivore and it's worked great for them. Or at least they perceive it's worked great because they don't feel like shit anymore, because funnily enough, they're no longer eating shit, which is obviously very baffling. Like, you're so surprised how that works.
Weird,
and then you've got people who have gone to vegan and they feel way better as well. And that's why they then bang on about it. But there's also way more people that it hasn't worked for. And what you say there of, okay, you skip breakfast and it worked better, well, fucking do that then.
Yeah. And it is really like, it's the right tool for the right person at the right time. But if you don't understand the principles where you need to use the tools, like that's where people get missold, is because they don't understand why things work.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a very difficult thing to give to someone, because it takes time to learn it. We've all been doing this for years, and we have done it day in, day out. And it's the thing that we think about probably the most. And it's just like in normal people's vocabulary, it's just not there, and that's not something people get taught. And I don't think the solution is that, like, I think it's equally bollocks that people are like, oh, we should be teaching our kids about calories and macros. Like, probably shouldn't, because they don't need to really know it that young. It's probably not something that is that beneficial until you're getting towards your adult years. But if you understand a little bit more about the principles behind food, and why it's a good idea to eat fiber, and why fruit and vegetables are good for us. And, if you want to follow a vegan or vegetarian diet, well, here's how you do it in a really good way. Like, all of these things are just tools. And, like, one of the guys that I coach he really likes some of the principles of, like, he likes not wasting food. So for him, this whole, like, even though I think it's kind of bollocks the way that it's phrased, it's like nose to tail. Like, for me, that's just, if you shop at a decent butcher's and you buy cheap cuts of meat, like, it'll probably be the stuff that more often gets wasted. Stuff like oxtail and like shin and stuff like that you don't really get at supermarkets. But for him, that's like, he really likes that. He feels, very sort of like connected to the food he's eating. And he was like, oh, I was wondering about this whole carnivore thing. And I was like, well, like, look, there's some massive downsides to that diet in and of itself. But you can take that principle of, like, eat from the land, and if you really like that, it's a bit like your client, Jack. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to eat foods that have been processed or have been through more processing, provided that you're not just like putting something on a pedestal because it's not processed.
Yeah.
Because some foods that are processed are really, really fucking useful. And again, it's that same thing of, like, the cognitive dissonance between not eating processed foods but having a jar full of margaritas at the weekend. Like, there is something's gone wrong along the line somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's making sure that these tools are used for their intended purpose. And I think that's when people run into problems, when they try to use the wrong tool for the wrong job. Like you wouldn't try and hammer in a nail with a fucking screwdriver. So you've got to find a hammer, and you've got to do the right job with the right tool.
Yeah, going back to what you said earlier, actually, about like teaching kids calories and macros. Obviously, you and your partner have just had a baby. Have you thought about like the overarching principles of what you're going to try to instill in your kid about just being healthy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. No one's asked me that yet. And I think it very much, for me, it's probably going to come more from what she sees me do. I want my daughter to be looking at her dad like a role model. So it's definitely, interestingly, it's made my behaviors around exercise and nutrition, it's made it a lot easier to stick to a solid set of, habits and beliefs and guidelines for myself. Because, even at 3 weeks old, I think if I'm in that mindset of like, oh, it'll matter when she's 5, like, no, it matters now because it's going to matter in 10 years' time. And I think it's very much that, like, you teach them by showing them, how you do it. And I think, I haven't got everything right with my nutrition in my life. I've had ways of eating that probably were, along the lines of not an eating disorder, but disordered eating. At 120 kilos, when you're eating that much food, that's not a regular way of eating. That's not a healthy way of eating. You wouldn't sort of see me sort of finish a night out with my friends and order a family-sized pizza now, but that's what I used to do. And equally, like, I've done diets where, like, I thought, and I'd be interested to hear what your worst meals in a diet are, by the way. I thought blending cauliflower and egg whites and cooking it in a pan and then covering it in 0-calorie syrup was a good replacement for a pancake, because it was 200 calories, and I shit you not, it was like this big. And both of those things are bad, and I'm glad I did them, because now I'll never do them again. So for me, it's very much like, what does the food in our house look like? What's our culture around food? There's not that whole like, oh, I can't have that because that food is bad. That's never going to get said in this house. And I'm really lucky that, like, my wife has an amazing relationship with food. Like, I've got so much admiration for the way that she eats, because when she's not hungry anymore, it doesn't matter how much food is on her plate, she just stops. Whereas my sort of relationship with food was whatever's on your plate, it gets eaten. So I guess subconsciously I think more beforehand, because that's more helpful for me. So I will portion up something that I know is suitable for me. Whereas I can portion up whatever I want for Emily, she'll stop when she's done. So I think being around both me and her will be a really good thing for our daughter, because there's probably stuff that I do that Emily doesn't, and there's stuff that Emily does that I don't do. But I think that kind of combination of learning both will probably be a really useful thing. And ultimately, I think it comes down to like our stories and our beliefs around food growing up as kids. It's not the fact that we know about the food on your plate. Do you have to finish it because it's there, or can you stop when you're full? Because the way that, like, you speak about food, the way that you organize your family life around food, like, if we're out and about when she's a bit older and we all decide we want to get pizza, I'm not going to be like, that fucking bloke on Instagram said it was going to poison me and big food's going to keep us down because we're eating pizza as a family. I'm going to be like, Italian food is the best. Like, let's get pizza. So I think, for me, it's very much like, let your actions lead the way. Like, I don't need to be sitting her down with a textbook going, right, chapter 1, protein, when she's 5 years old and she can just about understand what that word means. I think it is very much like, you've got to be the person that, you want them to be. And to a degree, they're going to get influenced by other people anyway. You kind of have to accept that. And that's, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But I think from my point of view, all you can do is your best in your understanding of what's good for a person in the world, and what's right and wrong, and try and behave in a way that, best represents that for your kid. So I think it's, for me, it's much less about the sort of practical telling someone education. It's, well, how do you and your family show them about food is really what I think we'll be doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. I rate it.
Yeah. Okay. Do we want to run through some rapid fire questions now?
No, we don't.
Oh, we don't. All right.
No, we don't. Last thing we spoke about before
Organised as
we got
always.
started quickly was the renaissance of hybrid training.
Yes.
And it comes into a little bit of the theme of like what we've been speaking about so far, with people being very sure that this is the new best thing to do.
Yeah.
So go on, just let loose. Just give us your thoughts.
Let loose. I think it's, you know, like there's probably a couple of distinct, I guess, paths when it comes to this. Like, I think it's a really good thing, like, first and foremost, because people have remembered that, like, doing cardiovascular conditioning work is a good thing. And for such a long time, it was like, I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the whole, like, there's a bit of a running renaissance at the moment as well. Like, everyone's into their running. Says me, who's literally just got a package through the posts on this call with some running gear. But there is very much this sort of, I guess, more of a draw towards athletic performance and, you know, training less like a bodybuilder and more like an athlete. And that's not for everyone. And I think that I have a caveat to that in a minute. There's definitely a good part of it. For me, it's sort of like, is everything I wished CrossFit was, but never was, if that makes sense. Like the whole, and you know, I could sit here and bash CrossFit. I'm not going to, because there's good parts of that as well. But the thing I don't like about it is the absolute chaos in terms of the programming there. And yes, you know, I understand there's good coaches and they know what they're doing, but generally, I would say most of it's pretty chaotic. And as someone who is logical and likes being organized and planned, I don't like that. What I do like about the whole sort of like hybrid training is people have really got into essentially like what a lot of sports performance has been doing for the last sort of 40 or 50 years. So it is, in a sense, it's nothing new. I think the new thing is people like Alex Viada, people like Johnny Payne, Fergus Crawley, like those guys have been doing it really, really well, where they're showing concurrently how you can build really high levels of strength and really high levels of endurance. And I think that's probably the gap that we have. There's probably two different types of like people wanting to get into hybrid training. There's people wanting to, like, you know, do hybrid like those guys and do insane events that are pushing your body to the limit in strength and endurance. And there's people who like lifting weights and going for a run. And for me, I get why there's some, again, it's an idea that sells. It's easy to sort of like pick up because it's a hook. Like you're either, that's hybrid and that's doing fitness. Like that's what everyone should be doing. Like I couldn't give a fuck what people call it. If you want to call it hybrid training because you like that and you like the lifestyle and, you know, you like wearing represent and all that sort of stuff, then great, go for it. Because I mean, let's face it, that's what most people do with hybrid training. They buy top says 24/7. But there is the caveat of like a lot of that stuff, much like, you know, a lot of the things in CrossFit, you see all these top athletes who are super jacked and, you know, they're doing all these things like lifting crazy weights and being super ripped and running ultramarathons, but everyone forgets that they've got 10, 15 years of hypertrophy and strength training under their belt before that. And I think that's the thing to just caveat it with, is people shouldn't just shit on like bodybuilding training in general, because it's still going to help you with that stuff. You still need hypertrophy and you still need to train like a bodybuilder sometimes. We should be taking elements of bodybuilding and building them into, you know, what is a periodized program over a year.
Yeah.
And anyone that I'm working with who's really into that, I think it's great, but there's still periods of time where you're doing enough endurance work to keep that ticking over whilst you're trying to get absolutely wham. And then once you feel like, okay, my body composition's where it's at, like I've got the muscle mass that I want, I just want to retain it, then you pull back there and you absolutely ramp up your endurance stuff. And I think this is the thing that people miss out on. They think they should be doing everything all the time. And whilst that's good, it's good for beginners, you know, you can get away with a very sort of mixed method program where you're doing an equal amount of endurance, strength, hypertrophy, speed and power training. Like you can get away with that for a couple of years, probably when you're right at the start. But eventually you need to get to a point where if you want to run strength and endurance at the same time, you've got to be a bit smarter about it.
Yeah.
And there's times where you push on one and you pull on the other. There's times where you flip that on its head. And there's times where you maintain it all as well. And I think that's the you know, again, it's a thing that sells because it's sexy at the moment, because, you know, you have all these like shirtless, sexy people on the internet doing hybrid stuff and competing in high rocks and things like that, which is great. You know, I love it. I think it's brilliant, but I do think there is probably a bit of a misconception of what it actually is. I've probably done a shit job of giving an actual definition of it, because I think the whole sort of like, it is such a broad thing of what people are doing. I think the thing that people can't do if they want to do that is you can't just slap a running program on top of a bodybuilding program and expect yourself to be fine, because you're probably just going to get injured. Like, there does need to be that thing of like, just because more is better. Sorry, just because you're doing more, it doesn't mean it's better. Like, you have to figure out which parts of these actually fit together properly and, you know, run them in a sensible program. Where I think that's probably the thing that people get wrong the most with it, is just trying to do that middle ground of, I want to look like a bodybuilder, but I want to, you know, perform like Ollie March on. Well, he did bodybuilding training and strength training for a long fucking time before he started running ultramarathons, which is why he's so fucking jacked and can maintain his physique, because it takes a lot less to maintain a physique than it does to build it. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people get wrong, is they probably do much better if they try to build their physique first, because they're going to get stronger and fitter by doing that anyway. And then they start sort of, you know, getting a bit more specific with it in 2 to 5 years time. But selling someone on a 5-year journey is quite difficult, isn't it?
I used to work at a CrossFit gym, and in Wales, and one of the like top CrossFitters in Wales used to train out of there, and the guy had insane physique, right? Insane. And I remember people would, because I was like bodybuilding at the time, and I remember people would be like, why don't you just train like him, because he's a lot bigger than you? And I'd be like, well, like, if you talk to him, his name is Oz, shout out Oz if you're listening, but when you talk to him, you'd be like, what's your background? He'd be like, well, I got into bodybuilding. I did bodybuilding for like 5 to 10 years. Got to a point where I was like, okay, yeah, like this is cool, but I kind of just like the strength. Got into powerlifting, only really like squat and deadlift. Started to do a bit of running, started to do a bit of rugby, and then kind of found CrossFit. And it's like, he did bodybuilding for a long time, and was clearly pretty damn good at it. And then as he kind of developed more muscle mass and more strength, he realized, oh, I actually just kind of like the strength aspect and the performance aspect, and that's what interests me the most. Like, I think that's such a good point, is that just because you see what someone's doing now doesn't mean that's necessarily what they've always done. And I think, like, there is extreme amounts of merit in it is fundamentally bodybuilding, but sometimes you have to phrase it as like hypertrophy for people to kind of get their head around, because people don't like that word. It's a bit of a dirty word to some people. And like, you know, when you have like a powerlifter or a CrossFitter or an athlete or anything, often if I'm like mapping it out, I'll be like, this is our hypertrophy phase, and I'll be like, what's the difference between this and bodybuilding? I'm like, well, just time spent in the phase, really, like, you know.
And I think it's that thing of, you can have elements of that like all the time, of that whole like hybrid thing. And I think the biggest thing for me is it's very much like, it's become less of a training methodology and more of a lifestyle for people, which again, like, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's great that, you know, again, I think it's much like CrossFit, that it gives people some level of community, and it gives them some sort of relatability, and perhaps they have, you know, been really into bodybuilding for a long time, or perhaps they've just like observed it and they don't really kind of vibe with it. Like, that's fine, because, you know, we're not all going to like training in the same way. So perhaps this whole like, you know, do strength training and do running, you know, and do sprinting, like, that's a really cool thing for a lot of people. And, you know, maybe it's that combination of peppering a little bit of that while you're actually building some solid muscle mass, because, you know, just doing those things on their own, for some people, won't get them there. You'll get the genetic freaks that can do whatever they want, and they're just absolutely enormous. But like, for 99% of us, if we want bigger muscles that look more defined, we're going to have to do some bodybuilding training, and we can just mix it in. Like, you know, you can do a big lift at the start, you can do 80% of your session as bodybuilding and some sprints at the end. Cool. Like, just go through that phase of doing a little bit less of the strength and endurance, have it in there because you enjoy it, and then ramp it up when you're on the other side of that phase. And I think that's probably the missing element, that I'm certainly seeing it come in a lot more now, with people kind of accepting like, okay, actually, yeah, maybe being more muscular is a really good thing, and maybe I can't get that from pushing sleds and doing wall balls. maybe I do need to, do some bicep curls and leg extensions instead.
With that,
I mean, there's an obvious like edge that you get by being more muscular than other people. If you have a greater amount of muscle mass, there is potentially a greater capacity to perform better.
Yeah, and I think it's that, the deeper you get into it, and the more sort of specialized you get, the more you see that, like, I think generally for most people, having a slightly higher level of muscle mass is going to be a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
There's definitely situations where like more muscle isn't useful, but for most people with that sort of training, from where they're starting from, like more muscle and potentially less body fat and more muscle is going to be one of the most useful things to improve their performance. I think this is where that world of like, people seem to be on either side of it, right? Like it's either all aesthetics or all performance.
Yeah.
Where like, I think we should probably just sit somewhere in between of like, we either do more or less of those things. And it's a sliding scale. Like, yeah, you've got bodybuilding and then ultramarathon, but we're probably going to move more, towards or away from one of those things, rather than it being like, oh, we're trying to do both of those things at the same time. It's really fucking difficult.
I think truthfully, most people probably want a mix of both, though, surely. Like, if you could, like all bodybuilders do to an extent care about how much they lift. I don't think they care necessarily about like cardiovascular performance, but like they do care about how much they lift. And I think anyone who goes to the gym and invests that time in, even if it is for marathon running, like they are still going to want to improve their physique to some degree. So like, yeah, why not mix things?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's that sort of thing, like when people are 4 to 6 weeks in and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm leaner and I look more muscular. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Most of us probably want that as well. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. Like, most of us do probably want to have a physique that makes us feel confident. That looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
Some people feel confident at 22% body fat. Some people feel confident at 12. Like, we're not sort of putting a specific target on there for everyone, but if your body is changing and you like that, why not just make that part of the process? And I do think it is like, again, I did when I did this High Rocks race earlier in the year, on the start line, I was thinking, fucking hell, like I probably could have done with being a stone lighter here, like running this at 93 kilos versus, 86 where I am now. It would have been a hell of a lot easier doing it now than it was, 7 kilos heavier. So I think it is also that thing of like, you shouldn't make a judgment call on yourself for the fact that losing weight can sometimes improve performance. It's just a thing. It's just there. Like, it doesn't mean you're bad or good. You don't have to, but for some people, it's going to be a big performance improvement. So why not lean into it from the positive side of things? You're not losing weight because you think you're a piece of shit. You're losing weight because actually doing things at 7 kilos lighter is a hell of a lot easier.
It depends how much you weigh. but
yeah.
But yeah, generally, I get what you're saying, mate. This has been great. Really, really enjoyed this podcast. Thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure. I was going to say I could keep going all day, but I have 2 idiot Labradors that need walking, and it's putting it down with rain. So the sooner I get it done, the better.
Fair play, man. So just let the people know where they can find you, and we will round off the podcast.
So best place to find me is on Instagram. It's JC_performance coaching. And that is where you'll find, all my ramblings and wafflings and probably dog and baby pictures at some point, because, now I'm a dad, that's become my entire identity for now until next year, when being an ultramarathon runner will be my entire identity. So if you're interested in either of those things, follow along.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Jack?
Thank you, mate.
Yeah, just thank you for your time. Talking over each other. Oh, my days. Thank you for your time, Jack. It's honestly been a really, really good podcast. And it'd be great to have you on again, maybe after the marathon or something, or potentially sooner. We'll see. I want to pick your brain about more things that irk you.
yeah, please do. We'll set aside 2 hours next time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks very much, mate.
All right. See you later, lads. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.